When you think about serial killers, such names come to mind: Chikatilo, Dahmer, Bundy, criminals who are hard to call human beings knowing what they've done. But history has known cases that are more horrific, cases in which children have become ruthless murderers. One of them is a story about Mary Bel, an 11-year-old British girl sentenced to life imprisonment in 1968.
Little girl you're looking at was convicted in December 1968 after she confessed to numerous murders. She was only 10 years old when she committed her first crime. How could a child who looks like an angel become a murderer? In May 1957, a 16-year-old prostitute named Mary Bel gave birth to a baby girl. For unknown reasons, she, being completely devoid of maternal instinct, didn't abandon the child. Mary would have had a much better life in an orphanage than her parents' home. Mary Bel lived on White House Road, having moved there from the notorious Westmoreland Road. It was what might now be termed a deprived area, with high unemployment, alcoholism, wife-beating, child-beating, and all the usual symptoms of hopelessness that these places are synonymous with. In the 1960s, these townhouses were demolished to make way for modern housing, so local children often played in the houses that had been removed but not demolished, or played in the vacant lots created by the demolitions. Mary never missed her mother because only in her absence did she feel safe. Betty had mental disabilities from childhood, such as refusing to eat with her family for years, unless she put food in a corner under the chair. Betty was a prostitute and often absent from home working in Glasgow. In addition to Mary, she had 3 other children.
Mary was an unwanted child, and prior to her birth, Betty had made an unsuccessful attempt to poison her with pills. Mary's aunt, Asa McCricket, testified at her trial that Mary had been injured repeatedly in domestic accidents in her early childhood, when left alone with her mother, leading relatives to believe that Betty had tried to kill her daughter in an effort to make Mary's death appear to have been an accident.
On one occasion, sometime in 1960s, Betty simply threw her daughter out of a first-floor window, an independent witness admitting that he saw Betty giving her daughter sleeping pills disguised as candy. On another occasion, when Mary was still an infant, Betty sold her to a mentally unstable woman who could not have children of her own. Betty's other sister, Catherine, personally ran all over Newcastle until she found her niece and brought her home. At the same time, Betty, for reasons unknown, flatly refused her relatives' request to place Mary in their custody. Mary herself said during interrogation that she had been sexually abused many times because Betty had forced her to engage in sexual acts with men since she was 4 years old. There is another suggestion: a crazy mother suffered from Munchausen syndrome and attributed her daughter's illness in order to attract the attention of others. However, it's known that the would-be murderer learned about what death looks like at the age of 5, when she saw the death of a friend. Knowing the subsequent events of Mary Bel's life, we can assume that death didn't frighten her, but rather fascinated her.
On the outside, Mary was very sweet, but neighbors and schoolteachers alike had noticed her strangeness even before she became a murderer. Beth said the daughter of a prostitute was withdrawn, aggressive, and very plain. Nevertheless, this was not yet a sign of mental illness. Mary went to Delville Road School. Both there and at home, Mary attacked other children whom she tried to strangle. She vandalized and repeatedly showed signs of anxious behavior, including sudden mood swings or chronic urinary incontinence while sleeping. One of Mary's classmates later testified that by this point they were all used to Mary's erratic behavior, to the point that they could tell by her motor skills alone that Mary was going to attack one of them. From the other children, who were very reluctant to play with Mary, the only person she was friends with was her neighbor, Norma Joyce Bell. The girls were namesakes, and there was no kinship between them.
On May 11, 1968, one of the boys who lived next door to Bell's had an accident. A 3-year-old child fell off the roof of a one-story building and miraculously survived. No one thought of the accident being Mary's doing at the time, of course, though she was nearby at the time of the accident. 3 days later, 3 women complained to the local police department about the strange girl. They asserted that Bell was aggressive, even trying to strangle their daughters. The police officer didn't take the complaints of the concerned mothers seriously. On May 25th, the day before her birthday, Mary strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown. It happened in the abandoned house. Norma Bel, Mary's namesake, was a witness to the murder and she was in some way an accomplice to the crime. However, Norma is not believed to have been involved or even present. A local worker named John Hull arrived on the scene and tried to resuscitate the child, but to no avail. Mary took the liberty of finding Martin's aunt and told her that she knew where Martin was and that he was covered in blood because of the accident. The poor woman unwillingly followed her nephew's killer to the scene.
The days that followed were tormented by Mary and Norma, who asked how sad the family was, whether its mother missed him, and finally, Martin's aunt stopped opening the door for them one day. The juvenile murderer came up as a version that her friend confirmed Martin was beaten by unknown boys and died as a result.
This version made the police seriously confused, because there were no signs of violence on the body of the deceased and there was a bottle of sleeping pills next to him. The guards decided that death was a result of an accident. A 4-year-old boy accidentally drank sleeping pills. Very soon another strange thing that seemed impossible not to pay attention to. The day of Martin's funeral, Mary came to his house. The door opened inconsolable Martin's mother. The girl said she wanted to look at the deceased. A woman slammed the door in her face and soon forgot about the strange visitor. The murdered boy's mother remembered the incident only 2 months later, when the second gruesome crime was committed. It's noteworthy that Mary and Norma didn't particularly try to hide their guilt. Once they even announced to the neighborhood children that they were involved in Martin's death. This information reached the adults, but they considered the girl's statement a manifestation of an unhealthy fantasy.
In class, Mary drew a picture of a boy lying in exactly the same position as Martin Brown. Although Mary was not the only child who learned of Martin's death, she was the only one who drew the scene. Although this seemed strange, the teacher didn't suspect anything because she knew the children had heard of the incident. Mary's attacks on other children and her boasting continued. At one point, she pointed to the house where Martin Brown's body was found and told the neighborhood children that this was the place where she killed someone, but the children only laughed.
On May 26, 1968, when Mary was 11 years old, she attacked Norma's younger sister. She acted so violently and inadequately that Norma's father had to kick her out of the house. She began to spiral out of control after Martin Brown's funeral. Mary, wanting to be the center of attention again, turned to her best friend Norma and viciously attacked her, stretching her face and kicking her in the head. Completing her attack, she said she was ready to kill again. The children who saw the attack ignored the threat because Mary liked to over-dramatize things. In one photo taken during a demonstration that locals held to try to convince the government to turn down abandoned buildings to prevent more deaths, 2 girls can be seen holding a placard, one of them Mary Bel. The young killer intended to stay involved in the incident. Experts believe that the killers are doing this to satisfy their narcissistic egos and to maintain the hype about the murder as long as possible. Although a formal criminal investigation hasn't begun since Martin Brown's death, the doctor examining the body told the officer that it looks like some child strangled him to death. Without any signs of violence, as the child's hands are much smaller and weaker than those of adults. On the same day that Norma's sister was attacked, the girls snuck into a kindergarten in Woodland Crescent. They broke in through the slate roof by ripping off the shingles and trashing it. They overturned the tables and smeared ink and poster paints everywhere. They left behind 4 different writings and strange grammatical errors. The police regarded the incident as tasteless and childish hooliganism. Had these confessions of guilt been taken seriously, at least the life of another child would have been spared. On July 31, 1968, Mary and Norma Bel again committed the murder by strangling a 3-year-old child, Brian Howe, 2 months after Martin Brown's death, in the vacant lot near the same place where their first victim had been murdered. After the boy was killed, the girls returned to carve the letter N on the boy's stomach with a razor blade, which they then changed to M. Mary also used scissors to cut off the boy's hair to stretch his legs and severely mutilate his genitals. Since the girls were small, their testimonies were constantly contradicted, and no one will ever know for sure what happened that day. After the murder of the second child, police began to suspect that the letters left at the daycare center were not a prank at all, but had been left by someone who confessed to the murder of Martin Brown. The discovery of Brian Holmes' body triggered a large-scale manhunt involving more than 100 detectives, and by 2 August, more than 1,200 children had been questioned. Norma and Mary were questioned on August 1st. At the interrogation, Norma showed agitation while Mary was attentive but silent, although both girls were evasive and contradictory in their initial statements. They freely admitted playing with Brian the day he died, but denied seeing him in the afternoon. The next day, Mary was questioned again. She said that on July 31st, she saw a local 8-year-old boy playing with Brian and hitting him several times. In addition, she said she also remembered that the boy was covered in grass and weeds, as if he was rolling around in a field, and that he had a small pair of scissors with him. Then Mary reported that she once saw that the boy tried to cut the cat's tail off with those scissors but failed because the scissors were broken. As soon as Detective Chief Inspector James Dobson read Mary's testimony, he immediately concluded that Mary might be the murderer. The 8-year-old boy that Mary was talking about was quickly interrogated and had a solid alibi for July 31st. And only the police knew the presence of the broken scissors at the murder scene. Norma was questioned again and confessed to everything. According to Norma, Mary said she enjoyed strangling children, mutilating the body of 3-year-old child. Over a period of time, each girl accused the other of murder. Norma's parents issued a statement trying to explain something. Mary was violent and Norma should not be held responsible for it. On December 17, 1968, Norma Bel was acquitted in a Newcastle jury trial, and Mary Bel was convicted of 2 manslaughter convictions with extenuating circumstances of limited responsibility. Such a circumstance was a court-ordered psychotic diagnosis of psychopathic disorder, the symptoms of which are lack of remorse for the acts committed and an ability to plan for their consequences. At the trial, Mary declared that she had only killed for the pleasure of killing. In the end, Mary was sentenced on Her Majesty's assurance to indefinite imprisonment with the possibility of release only when the authorities decide that she is not a danger to society. Prior to her trial, Mary was alternately held in Durham and South Norwood remand prisons following her trial, initially held at the Redbank Special Asylum for Asocial Children in Merseyside. 25 years later, John Annabels, one of the killers of 2-year-old James Belvedere, was imprisoned during this period, where she was the focus of much attention in the British press and even the German magazine Stern. Betty was interviewed quite often about her daughter and even showed reporters a letter she said Mary had written. Although the institution was designed for children of both sexes, Mary was the only girl there when she entered. She later claimed that when she was 13, she was raped by several other inmates and by a staff member at the Redburn Special Asylum. Mary stayed until November 1973, when she was transferred to Her Majesty's Shield prison in Cheshire because she had turned 16. Mary strongly opposed the transfer and unsuccessfully petitioned for parole. When Mary turned 18, she was transferred to Moor Court Prison, where she attended a secretarial course. 15 months later, in September 1977, Mary and another inmate, Anne Breast, escaped and spent the next few days with 2 young men in Blackpool, sleeping in various local hotels where Mary used the pseudonym Mary Robinson, after which Breast and Bell dispersed. Anna went to Leeds and Mary went with one of her boyfriends, Cliff Shorncliffe, to his home in Derbyshire counties, where she was apprehended on September 13. By then, in an attempt to disguise herself as a blonde-haired woman, she was returned to prison that same evening, where she lost all her privileges for 28 days. Anna Breast was apprehended a few days later. For a time, Bell lived at the Camber Law Lodge, a women's detention center in South Norwood. Bell's final place of confinement was Excombe Grange Open Prison in North Yorkshire, where she was transferred in June 1979 to prepare her for return to society. While there, Mary worked as a secretary, a waitress in a cafe at York Cathedral, and from where the 23-year-old Mary was released in May 1980 after 12 years in prison. So that she could begin her life with a clean slate, she was given papers with a new name and was granted complete anonymity. A few years later, on May 25, 1984, she had a daughter. For a long time knew nothing for her mother's past. In 1998, however, Bell's residence was discovered by Sussex reporters, after which mother and daughter were forced to leave their home under the supervision of undercover police officers, covering their heads with sheets. The anonymity Mary received after her release was also valid for her child, but it was temporary in nature according to the original rulings and was limited to the period of minority, which means that after the age of 18 the girl should have been excluded from the program. However, on May 21, 2003, Bell won a Supreme Court case, which ruled similarly to grant her daughter's anonymity for life.
In January 2009, it was reported that Bell had a granddaughter similarly included in the lifetime anonymity program. Whether Mary Bel deserves to live out the rest of her days as a normal person with a normal family, or there should be no forgiveness for the woman who killed children. Write about in the comments, and as always, take care of yourselves and each other. See you in the next videos. Bye.